Is there such a thing as the male or female vote? Of course there is. The research says yes. Here at France 24, Emerald Maxwell breaks down the figures for us.
The gap is now in the double digits in several recent polls, with more and more men leaning for Trump and women for Harris. An NBC poll showed that men favoured Trump over Harris by 12 points, while women preferred Harris by 21. An overall gap of 33 points.
I know nothing
Trump's
about
history of personal attacks against women and the long list of sexual assault allegations against him has alienated many. But most polarising is his record on women's rights, particularly the Supreme Court decision taking away the constitutional right to abortion.
The court handed down a victory for the Constitution, a victory for the rule of law, and above all, a victory for life.
A decision which Trump has proudly taken credit for, while Kamala Harris has come out strongly against it.
One does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree the government should not be telling women what to do with their body.
And there's not much that the Republicans can do to walk back what's already been done. Donald Trump's nomination of 3 conservative Supreme Court justices have really opened up Pandora's box.
The gender gap is even wider among Gen Z. Donald Trump's performative masculinity has proven popular among young men, an effect that grew after the assassination attempt on him in July. Trump has been increasingly courting this demographic, appearing alongside male-centric podcasters and influencers and wrestler Hulk Hogan.
When they took a shot at my hero, make America great again!
Polls show increasingly that as women progress, young men feel they've been left behind and don't feel served by the Democrats' focus on inclusion and diversity.
There is lots to discuss. Let's bring in Fraser Jackson, our correspondent in Washington, watching all developments for us. Of course, we join him at his place, the White House there in the background. Fraser, great to see you. This gender gap that Emerald was talking about in the report, some 33 points or thereabouts. What age group is this gender gap most visible in?
Yeah, well, that age gap, of course, visible throughout the electorate, but it is that young tranche that Emerald was saying at the end of that report that really is where things start to come into stark relief. You'll see that there are now 8 million more Gen Zers who are eligible to vote just since the midterms in 2022. And it is actually an age group which, in the men particularly, is skewing actually more conservative now, and they're tending to walk away somewhat from the Democratic Party. One recent poll from the Harvard Youth Poll, which is deemed by many as the gold standard, showed that 26% of men were more likely between the ages of 18 to 24 to say that they were Republican. That's 2 points more than said they were Democrat, and 48% said that they would recognize themselves as more moderate. And the reason for this really is that this youth vote is used to this political turmoil that we are seeing in the United States, which for many in the older generations is seen as a bit of a blip over the last decade. For them, it is the status quo. Remember when Donald Trump came onto the scene, they were 8, 9, 10 years old. So this is what they are used to seeing. So that really means that these young voters are really in the in the Republican Party, because they like Donald Trump. This is not the same kind of electorate that we're seeing with the older voters who what used to be, the Reagan style of Republican or the George Bush style of Republican. These really are here for Donald Trump themselves, for Donald Trump himself. And that is really because they see his personality as somebody who's been rebellious. That's something that resonates with them, and that is reflected by Donald Trump in turn, by the podcast people that he's talking to, the so-called manosphere of influencers that he is surrounding himself with. And the right wing is doing a much better job at resonating with those young men who feel alienated and feel somewhat emasculated, and is better at talking about their mental health issues, about the fact, that potentially they aren't getting into the colleges they wanted to. It's harder to find jobs. And that is something that actually the Democrats are not doing as good a job of. They're also talking about a lack of strong male role models on the Democratic side of the party. Remember, again, if you've been growing up from age 8, 9, 10, all you really know is the Democratic ticket is not the hope years of Obama in 08 and 2012, but rather Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton and now Kamala Harris. So an altogether different picture for this electorate, especially in that younger age group.
And how can the campaigns, both of them, Trump, Harris, how can they try to close this gap? Because it's essential if one of them wants to sort of steal that march and get into that White House.
I think it's fair to say that Harris definitely has more paths forward and more inroads into that electorate than Donald Trump has. Donald Trump is very much playing for that young male base. He's not really making much of an effort to try to resonate with female voters. He, of course, has had a couple of rallies in the last couple of weeks where he said, "Women, I'm going to be your protector." That came off quite patronizingly to the female voters that I've spoken to in recent days. So the fact that Donald Trump was the one who overturned Roe v. Wade and has taken the victory laps for that in the past, that is really definitely being held against him. So he really will not get much more of a sliver unless he changes tack, but Kamala Harris definitely has some ways forwards. She could move into that more podcasty space where these young voters tend to be getting most of their news from, more social media, and she has started to do that in some ways. She did a Wired autocorrect interview online recently. Tim Walz, we saw, did another podcast, the Subway Tracks podcast as well, but they're trying to court more of that young vote by getting through to that younger electorate by mentioning things like football. That's what Doug, the second gentleman, has been talking about. And Tim Walz is, of course, trying to push his own kind of brand of Midwestern masculinity to resonate to those voters in those key swing states as well. So there is still ground to make up. The time now really is starting to run out. Just over a month away from the election. We're now 35 days away, so time starting to slip by.
Fraser Jackson. Time is slipping by, but nothing's getting past you, I can tell. Thank you very much indeed. Great to see you, sir. Fraser Jackson there, near the White House. The gender gap, eh? Trying to close it. Our thanks to Fraser Jackson, who's watching all developments for us. We, of course, will continue to cover the campaign from all angles right up until that voting date, November the 5th.